Hello and welcome to the Still Rolling BJJ podcast. I'm Matthew Montgomery. Today I'm joined by TJ Kreitzer. TJ graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1999 with a degree in behavioral sciences. Over the next several years, he attended NATO's premier fighter pilot training course, Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, or ENJJPT, and he became an F-16 fighter pilot. He served overseas in Korea and deployed to Iraq as a combat flight lead, and he was recognized as the Hill Air Force Base Flight Lead of the Year in 2005. Later, he served as an instructor and evaluator pilot at ENJJPT, overseeing student training and managing several operational components of the program. During that time, he also earned an MBA from Texas A&M. He retired after more than 20 years of service in 2019. TJ began his Jiu-Jitsu journey in earnest in 2015, and he's been an active Masters competitor, medaling at several IBJJF Worlds level events and appearing on multiple Fight to Win cards. TJ was awarded his black belt in 2024. And then after a chance meeting with a struggling veteran after a jiu-jitsu class, TJ was inspired to search for potential volunteer opportunities. Soon after, TJ became aware of the We Defy Foundation and applied to serve as an ambassador. TJ is passionate about helping people understand why jiu-jitsu works as a tool for helping disabled combat veterans cope with their challenges. He firmly believes components of the practice, such as human touch and personal accountability, are easily overlooked and yet integral in the healing process. TJ uses his organizational skills that he practiced as an Air Force officer to help manage the day-to-day operations of the We Defy Foundation. So welcome aboard, TJ.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's get into it. We'll start kind of at the beginning of what I know about you. An Air Force Academy grad. What was that like? Getting into and attending an academy.
You know, it's funny. You have if you look back through your life, there are like very specific moments sometimes you can tie to a trajectory that maybe otherwise wouldn't have occurred. And as a kid, I was into this World War I flight simulator called Red Baron, and I started getting into building all these airplanes and models and stuff. I just thought they were cool, and I got into more modern fighters. But it's not something I ever thought I would ever do. I just liked the stuff, and it was neat. The games were fun, and the trench run from Star Wars. And I was like, when I was a kid, I didn't want to be Luke. I wanted to be Wedge.
Okay.
The other guy that in the other X-wing that always survived all the Death Star battles.
Yeah.
But I remember one day, so I grew up in Cleveland, and this is when the steel industry is falling apart. It's the mid-90s, and a lot of my friends' parents were losing jobs over time. My family went through that, and my mom. This is that moment where my mom sat me down one night. She says, "What do you think you want to do? When you grow up?" I don't know. I like maybe be a vet. Like I like dogs. Maybe that. I don't know. So what do you think about all this flying stuff? What do you mean? Like to do the flying stuff? She goes, "Yeah. Do you think you want to be a pilot?" I'm like, I have no idea. Is that even a thing? I mean, that's like being an NFL player.
Yeah.
Who gets to do that? Who gets to do that? That was my thinking. I remember saying that. I said to my mom, "That's like being an NFL player. Who gets to do that?" And she said, "Well, do you know what the Air Force Academy is? And do you know what ROTC is?" And I did not. And so she explained what it was. And she said, if you graduate from those schools, it's possible on a scholarship or from an academy, maybe you could go be a pilot. She said, there's no money for you for college either. And my parents did not graduate from college. And my mom said, "We think your grades are strong enough that you should probably go, but there's no money. So if you're going to go, we have to figure out a way to pay for it. So this might be something for you to consider." And that was in 10th grade. And that moment said I wouldn't be sitting here right now in this house, in this room with the jiu-jitsu black belt.
Yeah.
If that conversation hadn't happened. And I wouldn't be in We Defy.
Did you have military in your family at all?
Mm-mm. Just my grandpa and his 3 brothers were all in World War II.
Okay.
And my grandma actually, that flag behind me is her brother's flag when he died in a plane accident in Hondo during World War II, and this is in Texas. He was a bombardier instructor, and the plane blew up in the air. And that flag was what was given to my grandma when he died. So I've always kept that.
So
Mhm.
to get into the Air Force Academy, having no background in military, and I can actually kind of compare it a little bit to me, except if there was a sorting hat, I was definitely going to be an enlisted Marine. My grades were not good. So you applied, right? So you had the grades.
Yeah, I had the grades, and my grades were okay. And and my test scores like ACT, SAT were a little below average for the average appointee. And you have to get a nomination from either a congressman or a senator. John Glenn at the time was the Ohio senator, and I got a West Point nomination from him. So I had to get a nomination from my local House of Representatives representative, which I was able to do. But I interned in his office, like, so that I was trying to do everything I could. Like, I joined Civil Air Patrol. I, worked 2 part-time jobs, partly because I wanted to have spending money and we didn't have money, but also because I wanted to be able to put stuff on a resume. So even though my grades were good, I needed leadership. I needed to show like I was team captain of stuff. I got into some martial arts. I wanted to build out as well-rounded as a candidate resume as I could, because I knew my grades probably were not going to be the thing that got me in. They might not eliminate me from contention, but I was going to need some other X factor. So I did it through extracurricular activities. And from the second I had that conversation with my mom, I was just laser focused on figuring out how do I pull this off. And then I did have an excellent liaison officer who wasn't actually my assigned one. It was someone that I happened to meet on another trip. I was in Washington, D.C. on kind of a symposium for like youth leadership that I wanted to go to because I wanted to fill out this resume. So I met a man there who was a liaison officer, had been a Vietnam backseater in aircraft. And for whatever reason, we clicked, and we had a conversation. He said, "You have to talk to me when you get home. We're going to have a phone conversation. We don't have the time here, but, you know," and he said, "If you want to be a fighter pilot, you have to go to the Air Force Academy. You have to become a sailplane instructor pilot there. You have to apply to go to NJET after you graduate, because if you go to NJET, you will fly fighters, because at the time, that's all they gave out there was fighters, basically." He said, "This is the path. And there's other paths that can branch off that. But if you want your high percentage shot, your high PK kill, that's where you go. This is the path you need." And he helped me to structure my resume and advised me on all these different things I should do. Um, and I don't know what it was, like I don't know exactly what it was that he saw that clued him into, hey, this kid's got it. But he must have seen some kind of X factor that knew that even though his grades are okay, he's got some other things that I see obviously that I think we can leverage to get him to be a very competitive candidate.
Well, I think that in what you just laid out, as far as once you kind of had an objective, you were doing all these other things with that objective in mind. So you probably recognize that, when you've got that objective, you can make things happen and stay focused on what you're doing. Um,
I mean, that's just that is kind of innate to me. It's for whatever reason I have. It applies to We Defy. It applies to the other things I've done in my life, because getting the academy was only part of it.
sure.
And you had to survive.
Yeah. I mean,
To get back to your first question, is like, what was it like? It is not a fun place to be.
no, no. And,
It's a great place to be from,
yeah, well, and
but not a fun place to be at necessarily.
and I'm not gonna do the inter-service rivalry. I'm not gonna bash on the Air Force at all, but I imagine being, um, it's an academy, right? So you have West
Yeah,
Point.
yeah,
You also have all the others, Citadel and VMI and some of these other places where, I hear the stories. I assume that the Air Force Academy has a flavor of that
yeah,
inherent in what they're doing. Um,
yeah. It's hard. I mean, it's 6 weeks of basic, before school starts, and then you get a year of school, which is basically a step up from basic your whole freshman year. I mean, you're told what to do, what to wear, where to go, how to walk, how to sound off, how you speak to upperclassmen. You never get to have a regular conversation with an upperclassman outside the academic room or on your collegiate team. Everything else, you're yelling at the top of your lungs, sounding off.
Yeah.
In basic answers to questions that come out of a little book you read. I mean, that was an entire year of my life.
Yeah.
And for me, actually, that year, that wasn't the hard part. The hardest year for me was the second year, because now you were released from a lot of those behaviors, because all three upper classes focus on the freshmen. But now as a sophomore, you were sort of invisible. Like, you really didn't have a role. You didn't really get to make any impact on the people around you, or the programs. But as you went to be a junior and a senior, it's supposed to be a leadership laboratory. They want you to be making some level of decisions to help prepare you for officership when you graduate. But that sophomore year, you're in this kind of weird limbo. Well, you don't have any real power or influence, except you get to yell at the freshmen also.
Yeah. But you're not.
But
yeah.
you don't get anything else. And that I thought that was hard, because the freshman year core stuff, like, it's the core math, the classes aren't easy, but I took a lot of college prep. But that second year was where, okay, now we're going in with the heavier engineering. Now you're eligible to go to like aero, astro engineering, civil engineering, double E, stuff that where I was not as strong academically, because I was really good at the softer arts, like psychology. I got a psychology degree. I really like poli-sci and economics management. Those sorts of things I was really good at. But the technical stuff was much harder for me. So that second year, I had to work really hard on the academic side to stay above water. And I never got lower than a C, which is great, because a lot of people end up on academic probation, and some people fail out. So I always met the standard, but academically, I struggled to exceed the standard, to be a standout that way. It was the other side of it, actually. It was the military side of it. It was kind of the leadership pieces. It was the organizational stuff. It was running programs that we have to do outside of school. That's officership prep. Those pieces were what I was really good at. And I think, like, we kind of identified, if I had a goal, I found ways to attain it. I found the right things to do. I was able to keep my head above water academically.
Yeah.
I think for that kind of reason, because I identified, okay, what's the threat here? What do I have to make sure I absolutely take care of? And I was able to do it, even though I wasn't spectacular at it. But then on the flip side, the areas I could shine in, I was able to do that as well.
Well, and that, I tell you what, learning how to do things that maybe you're not super crazy about, the fact that you're able to, because I couldn't, I was not a good student. So the conversation that I had with my family when I was going to tell them I was going into the military, my grandparents had no idea how, what my GPA was. So we were at a family dinner, and I said, I'm going to go into the military. And my grandmother, we're from Colorado, by the way. So her reaction was like, "Are you going to the Air Force Academy?" I said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to enlist." And they said, "Oh my God, like, are you serious?" Because my grandfather was in the Army. He was a paratrooper in the, kind of the Korean War era. But other than that, not really a military family. And so I said I was going to enlist, and said, "Well, you're going to the Air Force, right?" And I said, "No, I'm going to go to the Marine Corps." Oh my God, it was like the end of the world. And they're very proud of me, obviously, but yeah, it was kind of a funny thing, because I was not college bound, and it took me a lot of years to figure out how to keep all those ducks in a row, and I've got a good career now. But yeah, that took some extra years of maturity on my end,
Sure.
to get to what you seem to already have innately. So you finish Air Force Academy, and you don't know that you're going to be a pilot yet, right? You still had other hurdles to clear.
Yeah. So extracurricular wise, I got into soaring because that particular liaison officer said you want to be a soaring instructor pilot.
What
So your
is
first
soaring?
summer, soaring is flying sailplanes.
Okay.
So, you're sitting in a glider, and it's attached to another airplane that has a prop on it, and they pull you up over the mountains in Colorado, and then you pop yourself off and you fly around. See if you can climb. You can find some thermals in the heat. Otherwise, you're descending the whole time, and you have to stay within certain ranges of the airfield because if you get too far away, your fuel is your altitude. So if you're
Sure.
too far out, you're not going to make it back to home base. So um, that was my initial experience flying. So I said I wanted to go do this fighter pilot thing. I wasn't even in the back of an airplane until I was 16, and that was to go to Washington for that one symposium I mentioned.
Yeah.
So that set me up to be eligible to apply for NJEPT while I was at the academy. So at the end, you're ranked by order of merit. So the number one graduate gets to pick from whatever they want, and number two gets to pick from whatever's left. And if you're pilot qualified, meaning medically qualified to be a pilot, then that's an option for you. And there are regular U.S. pilot training bases where you could get, after you graduate, either a fighter or a heavy. And then there's one program called NJEPT, and you have to be specifically selected to go to NJEPT. And it's a NATO program. So like Germany and Canada and the Italians, they all send the Scandinavian countries, they all send their pilots to Texas, to Wichita Falls, Texas. And that's where we train basically a tremendous number of NATO student pilots. And that program, if you graduated as an American there, you got a fighter back when I was going through. And it's changed some since then over the years, like needs of the Air Force wise, but that was the highest probability of a kill, and that's that was the goal, get it. So, doing the things I did at the academy, and again, not being strong academically, but with some of the other things I did there, like the soaring and some other extracurriculars, like was able to get involved in, position myself to be competitive for an MJEP slot. So I ended up getting one of those. So when I graduated, I had a certain number of months I had to wait for my slot, but then I went to Wichita Falls to go through pilot training.
Awesome. And so once you had your fighter, you deployed a couple of times. You spent some time in Korea, correct? And when did you deploy to Iraq?
2005.
Okay.
It was kind of, this is 20 years ago now. In fact, I was just thinking about this in May. It was 20 years ago when I came home of this year, but it was right when I think we were starting to recognize the nature of this counterinsurgency that we were going to be dealing with. And at the time, we were not dropping a lot of live ordnance. The need wasn't there, but we were starting to see more and more IEDs and more attacks on troops. And we supported a lot of missions where guys were going in to capture, specific targets. And that was interesting because it was cool to know sometimes if you're able to find out, or you're able intel wise, you're able to find out like what you were doing and why you were doing it. It was rewarding to know that you're helping these guys on the ground to go after specific high value targets, things like that. That was a neat thing.
Yeah, I can tell you, having been one of the guys on the ground in Iraq, it was an awesome feeling while you're in the midst of it all, that when you heard an aircraft, you knew it was yours. And I can't even hardly picture like what that kind of fear would be if the roles were reversed. We had a lot of helicopter support for us with the initial push, but every time we heard a helicopter or an aircraft, we were thrilled because we knew that they were gonna do some damage, and B, they were friendly.
Yeah.
So,
well, and we knew that by being there, And by doing what the JTACs were asking, it didn't have to be dropping ordnance.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that by being there, we were changing the battlefield.
Absolutely.
We changed the tactical situation on the ground. Just because once the bad guys knew that you were present, they changed their behavior.
100%.
And you even if you're not getting to do that part where you're dropping bombs and shooting guns and stuff, you're still contributing to the tactical scenario, and still helping the ground team meet their objective, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because now they can maneuver. Now they can do things they couldn't do before you showed up as an asset. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's the nail on the head. They've got to hunker down. So you had your deployment to Iraq, then you move into. I assume, I know a little bit about how naval aviation works, where guys will have they'll have their flight time, they'll have their these parts of their career, but then they get tasked out to either go to war colleges or other kinds of leadership. What other kinds of leadership were you learning, or did you end up with as kind of your, I'll call them side quests, when you were in a flight seat?
So most of my time was in the cockpit, which was good. I left active duty before I would have had to do a staff job. So I went from the F-16 back to the T-38 as an instructor. And then the next assignment after that, either that one or the one after, you eventually would have had to have that staff job or that non-flying job. So I left and joined the reserves to stay as an instructor pilot. So my Air Force or my military job was always to be a pilot.
Okay.
But then if you talk about the nature of leadership within a fighter squadron, within the pilot community, I think it's different than in a lot of other types of units because everybody's officers. And the distance in rank is much smaller than
That makes sense.
in a much broader part of the military. So I think the leadership model there, it's still there where you have, commanders and everything else, but there's much more peer-to-peer influence, I think, in that sort of environment. And obviously the rank still matters and people respect the rank and respect the positions. But you're dealing with a different demographic of soldier, of warfighter. You got these very, very highly educated, book-wise too, like academic degrees, all this stuff. People that are very close together in rank and close together in age with a college experience, whether it's an academy or something else. So college experience can be different, but it's kind of it's a different kind of leadership experience. When you talk to a lot of people who are dealing with junior enlisted, and you've got these kids coming out of high schools they're not experienced in life yet, and they're making sometimes really poor decisions, and they get in trouble, and that's just a component of what the leadership is in that particular demographic, right, or in that area. With the pilot community, we didn't see a lot of that type of stuff.
You guys are all high performers,
so
too.
It's a different experience. Yeah, it's like you have a different level of accountability, of expectation, the drive it took to be like every single person. That's the other thing about the fight, the Top Gun movies and stuff. And yes, they are overdone and there's parts of it that are cheesy, but especially I thought the second one, what they did well was kind of show that there is this little bit of there's a competition, and sometimes it gets a little beyond healthy. Like it can be a little maladaptive. And in a fighter squadron, your job is to navigate it as a leader too. Like get everybody staying on the same page. Don't let the competitiveness get to be a detriment to the unit. And it typically doesn't. But you have personalities too. And guys that you can tell just because of the competitive nature of these high functioning individuals, some of them are sometimes vying for a slot, wanting to maybe get a weapons school slot. And nobody ever got in each other's way or tubed anybody else. Like that was never a thing. We were a team. We were always looking out for each other. But you were always looking for advantages too.
Okay.
And you wanted to win. You always wanted to win.
So like if your entire weight bracket all had to train in the same gym for 6 months ahead of a a tournament.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Because you were always training with those same people. But when you fought the war, you were going to fight against somebody else, you know? But you knew who number one was. And everybody always wanted to be number one, but there only gets to be one. But you also knew who number two and number three probably were too, you know? And it's the same way you're right, same way in the gym. You know who the best guys are, who's the best grapplers.
Now, obviously, you said you guys were a team. You're competitive at the same time. Um, one of the great things about jiu-jitsu is those good competitors usually in a healthy gym are going to be helping the other guys that are maybe not getting it.
Mm-hmm.
Was that kind of a similar dynamic in that kind of a?
I think in the gym you see people intentionally helping each other to grow in jiu-jitsu. In a fighter squadron, it was a little different because of rank and roles. So two wingmen never went out and flew together. You'd have a wingman who's less experienced. You'd have a flight lead who's more experienced. You have an instructor pilot who might be the flight lead. So there was almost always one person who, like, you'd look at like a purple belt and a blue belt, where they're rolling together. And you might see the purple belt teach a little bit, but the fighter squadron was very structured. You didn't throw two, like in a dogfight in training. I don't think we ever saw two guys just go at it like you'd see in the gym. There were always very specific objectives. And one person, we have a training aide, and one person who's the one who's being trained. So it was almost always an environment like that, where one person was a trainer and the other person was a trainee.
Okay.
So it's a different relationship. When you're in the gym, you're both training with each other in order to get better. But like my job isn't necessarily in the gym isn't necessarily to help instruct you unless I'm the coach. But if I'm a purple belt and you're a blue belt, I probably just want to beat you up.
Okay.
Because I want to practice my stuff.
Sure.
It's different in a fighter environment, because there's always an objective. There's always a syllabus. You're always being evaluated. And that was one of the stressful things. So every single thing you do, you're being evaluated by somebody at some point. Everything's graded. Everything goes into the giant computer that ranks everybody all the time.
What and this will kind of shift gears a little bit. So, I mean, you retired after you had been in how many years? 19?
I got 20 total.
20 total. Okay.
11 active duty, 9 in the reserves.
So when I guess maybe being in the reserves gave you a little bit of a longer or more natural transition out. But when you get out of the Air Force and you're no longer in a fighter jet and you're moving into commercial or figuring out where you're going, was that challenging in the sense I kind of feel like you probably already kind of had your mission, you did you already kind of have your commercial job lined up when you left the Air Force? Were you already doing it because you were in the reserves?
Yeah, luckily it all fell into place at the same time, just by accident. Like, I left active duty and I put in my papers. 6 months. No longer in the active duty. One day, next day, I show up and I'm in the reserves. I just wore different patches.
Okay.
Similar job, and my job at that point, instead of being in squadron leadership and running programs and managing programs while being an instructor, now was just go teach, just go fly with students. We're paying you as a reservist that's your job now. And right when that happened is also when I got my offer to go interview at an airline and then got hired. That those two things happened in tandem, but they often don't. It was luck. It was absolutely dumb luck that it worked out like that for me. When my old career in the Air Force, my active duty career ended, this other one just opened up. So now I was flying for an airline and flying in the reserves. But the kind of thing I think you were alluding to, or the question you were going to get to, is like, when was that transition easy or not? Because you still had a foot in the door.
Yeah, I mean,
you're still somewhat connected to the military.
Well, that and you have a obviously civilian equivalent career kind of you're able to
Right.
transition.
It's right
And,
there.
obviously your military and the work that you do with We Defy. I mean, we have so many veterans and athletes, with the We Defy programs where that transition period is the most critical time for veterans when they go from being a Marine or a pilot or whatever they were identified as to now I'm doing this other thing. I have some of this other baggage that I have from service or trauma or those things. Um, and so that's really where I was going is what was that transition like, going from such a competitive, high performing job to maybe not as stressful. Um,
I felt like something was missing right away. I mean, it was great at first. I'm like, okay, I I have more control over my life. I get to decide where I'm going to live someday. Like we'll move, we'll go to another spot somewhere, where maybe we have family, who knows. But that sense of purpose was not the same anymore. And knowing that what I was, I believed that what I was doing mattered and what I was doing was important. And after I left active duty, not being immersed in it anymore, that feeling of like significance greatly waned. And I absolutely struggled with that. And I remember like, I'd sit you call it on reserve, um, when you're on call for an airline and you're waiting and you're not home, you're in another city waiting for a call that may or may not come. And you're sitting for days at a time because you have to be close to the airport. That was tough because I didn't feel like I was actively engaging my brain or any, my behavior or my activity in something where I got to see the difference every day, like I did when I was flying,
mhm.
like I did when I was teaching students every day. Like that really mattered to me. And I didn't get to see the results of my effort in front of me. And that was hard. And that is eventually what led me to get back into martial arts because I had tinkered a little bit with it as a kid, my senior year in high school, and I really loved it. At the academy, I joined the judo team and I did it for 6 weeks, and then we had summer. And then I had to decide between that and soaring because I was not a good enough student to do both.
Okay.
So I threw all my eggs and I made the decision. I love this judo stuff. This is super cool, but I can't do this and fly and keep my grades up. So I'm going to have to dump the judo. And over the years, I thought, oh, maybe it'd be really cool to get back into something someday. And then when I moved to Minnesota and we joined a gym that was a Lifetime Fitness, they had an MMA room. So I started just with MMA conditioning classes, heavy bags and pad drills and not really any grappling, but just hitting stuff, we're not hitting people, just hitting stuff.
Yeah.
And training with it. And it was a lot of fun and really liked it. So I did it, once or twice a week for a while. And at the same time, starting to look for some kind of like real opportunity to make a difference somewhere. It's like, I like dogs. I could go to a pound and
Yeah.
volunteer there, like, it's
Yeah.
like I told my mom. So I was starting to look at stuff like that. It's like, it just wasn't enough. And then I thought, well, maybe I should get competitive with the Muay Thai and stuff. And then I talked to a doctor um, that evaluates pilots, and he, for the FAA, and he was also on the state fight commission for boxing and MMA. He's like, man, I gotta tell you, I love those sports. It's not a good fit for your career, just because of the getting hit in the head.
Yeah.
Like this is not something you don't want to do that. So okay, so I didn't. And I was bummed. Like, no, it makes sense. I mean, I am a pilot. This is what I do. And one of the coaches said, "Why don't you try jujitsu?" I'm like, "What? That looks terrible. I don't want to do that." There's these big giant guys, and they were no-gi, and they'd come in like their shorts and rash guards, sweating, and it would be like the mat would be like a pool at the end of their practices, and I'm like, I don't want anything to do with that.
Hmm.
And they said, "Well, you should just try it because we know you. You're just this competitive guy. You hit stuff hard because I wanted to hit stuff harder than anybody in the room, just because I just want to win all the time." And they said, it's gonna sink its teeth in you, and you're not gonna be able, you're gonna be bit. Like, fine, I'll try it. And they were right. And before too long, I stopped doing any sort of striking arts because I really wanted to get really, really good at the competitive side of jiu-jitsu, at least for an old guy, because I'm not, the masters divisions and the young guy divisions are all totally different monsters, but I really, really, really wanted to get good at jiu-jitsu. And that started to be that thing that fed me. And it gave me this sense of purpose because now I had goals again. I hadn't had a real goal in a while, It was get better at this thing. Can you get to black belt? Can you go win a gold medal at this tournament? You're able to start seeing over time improvement, and you can set goals that you can attempt to accomplish. That started to set me on this path of finding a sense of purpose again. And then one day I was on a layover in Chicago, and I was talking to a guy who had just come back from Iraq, and his wife had left him. She had the kids, she took all the money, and he was really struggling. And we talked for like an hour and a half in the locker room after that class. And I do have a psychology background, and I still had like an interest in trauma and therapy, just layman's interest. Like, I don't have any advanced degrees for any of that. I've just kind of stayed up in some of the research because I think it's interesting, especially like trauma in reference to military service and that, those sorts of traumas. And after the conversation, he said, what you told me and what we talked about was more impactful for me than anything I think I've heard from a therapist with the VA or any of my other places I've been able to go. I think you need to find a way to help people. I was like, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Like, how would I even do that? Like, don't I need a degree? Don't I need to go back to school? Like, I got an MBA, I got this job. Like, I'm not looking for another profession here. But it still put this bug in me, like, well, maybe there's a way. And literally a couple weeks later, there was an event in Minnesota, a jiu-jitsu event, where they brought, it was Mission 22 and We Defy Foundation. And the board of We Defy was here, and it was a seminar with Chris Howder and Tom DeBlas, and then super fights after. And the board, like Alan Chabaro, who was one of the founders, Brian Marvin, who was the president at the time, they all fought. And I was learning about what Mission 22 was and what We Defy was. And I took business cards from both, and I reached out to Mission 22 because Julia Gumpert was there and she was running their volunteer team. I thought, this is cool. That seems like a neat organization. But then I looked at the We Defy side of but that's what I want to do. I want to get other vets into jiu-jitsu. That's what I want.
Yeah.
So a couple weeks later, the gym is in Texas, so I flew down to hang out with one of my best friends from high school who happens to live in Texas now. But the real reason I went was because I was going to walk into the gym and I wasn't going to leave until they let me say I could help.
That's awesome. Was that Three Embers?
Yeah, at the time it had a different name, but it was that building that you got to go visit too. Yeah, and that was it. And Keely was there, and walked in, and I said who I was and that I wanted to learn more. And I took the class, and I met Alan. And the funny thing was, Keely said, "We're standing up a volunteer team. We don't have any volunteers." So at the time it was the 5 board members and 2 contractors. And she said, "There's someone you need to email named Gina. She lives in Minnesota." I said, "Gina Franson?" And she's like, "Yeah, do you know her?" I'm like, "Well, I didn't know her, but she was the first female black belt in Minnesota, so I knew who she was." And just by chance, that's why the event was in Minnesota, because she was one of the board members who was there. She said, "Why don't you guys come up here? We'll fundraise, blah, blah, blah." So that's how it all came together. And if you start thinking back to these moments, like the one with my mom, this conversation in this locker room, if that conversation doesn't happen, maybe I don't get that bug in my ear.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not searching, and maybe I don't find We Defy and be ready to say, that's what I want to do.
That's outstanding. I mean, that's when you have these kinds of things that happen in your life that are impactful, and even if it's something like a locker room conversation, sometimes things will click and put you, on the path. So let's talk a little bit about what We Defy specifically is. I've mentioned it in other episodes. People hear me talking about it. But I'd like you to define it and, kind of state the mission.
We're a nonprofit that sponsors disabled combat veterans to train jiu-jitsu as a therapy for service-connected disabilities. So the bottom line is we want to take vets that are struggling. We want the people that are on the brink. We want to pull them into this community that we know about, and this activity, we know what it does for people, and we want to give it to them to help them find their sense of purpose, gain the benefits of the program, or of the practice, and move forward with their life. Because that transition is really, really difficult, and depending on the conditions under which you left the military, or if there was trauma that you experienced, you need tools to help you acclimatize to non-military life. And jiu-jitsu is a spectacular tool. And it's not for everybody. It's not like the magic pill. But for a large number of people, it is a spectacular tool to reintegrate and to learn to trust and to learn what you have in common with other people that maybe you would have discounted if you weren't stuck on the mats under them for a 3-minute round.
Yeah.
So it's been around since 2015. This is our 10th year. We've provided over 1,800 scholarships to veterans. They're a year long, and we're in every state. We've got gym partners in Japan, Guam, Puerto Rico, Belgium. So we have a worldwide footprint now. We place about 35 veterans a month, and then our eligibility it's on the website. So if anyone is interested in the program or interested in learning more about what you have to be eligible, I can run down the list, but it's really better for you to go look at the website and read into it there and just see, okay, who are we servicing specifically? Like what are the eligibility for it? But broadly speaking, it's people that are new to jiu-jitsu with an 80% disability rating and an honorable discharge. That's the big picture. And deployment to some sort of combat zone. That's the big picture. But specifics are on the website, and I'd encourage anybody interested in learning more about it to go on, WeDefyFoundation.org to see what it's all about.
That's awesome. Yeah, I found jiu-jitsu, I'll say on my own. Basically, I didn't know anything about We Defy until fairly recently. But it's been a massive, massive thing in my life that's steered me to get my proverbial shit together and back in gear. I think I've always kind of had a little bit of a servant's heart. I served in the military. I worked for the American Red Cross for a couple of years when I was out of the Marine Corps, and then I also spent time working with a group called Task Force 20, which gets veterans into fitness. It's fitness related mission. So kind of like We Defy, only just sort of a much wider berth. But where my actual passion was and is and remains is jiu-jitsu. And I think jiu-jitsu has some traits that, while you said it's not a magic pill, there are some things involved in jiu-jitsu that you're not going to find in some other places. I know you mentioned there are 5 specific components. I listened to you on the jiu-jitsu podcast, and boy, it was like listening to exactly the things that I've always thought about jiu-jitsu, and I'd love to hear about those 5 components.
So when I first got involved with We Defy as a volunteer, I had to thought to myself, like, they want us, the board wants us to explain, like, what this is, and but like nobody had really written down what it was. Like, what is it that works? Well, we just it does. Like, look what happened to Joey, who, if we go back in the origin, he was a triple amputee that showed up at the gym. At the time, it was called Tier 1, and Alan, the owner, saw Joey, and Joey came in with his daughter, said, "I'd like my daughter to train." And Alan said, "Well, what about you? Do you want to train?" He says, "Why? I don't know if it's possible. Like, I have an arm and nothing else." And he said, "Well, if you're patient with me, I'll be patient with you." And they spent the next couple months every Tuesday or something, like doing private lessons where Alan would take jujitsu. And for Alan, it was an interesting thought experiment too. Like, how do I take what I know about jujitsu and modify it for this individual's body?
Yeah.
So he took it on as a particular challenge. And eventually, Alan got to the point, or Joey got to the point where Alan thought he was ready to be in class. And one day he just said, I'll see you in class on Tuesday. And it's cool. It's a great story when Joey tells it, because he's like, I'm going to do what? I'm going to go in there. So, and I don't want to speak for Joey, but I'll retell what my understanding of his experience was, because I've heard it say it a few times. But when he was there in his first class, he got the crap kicked out of him, and he loved it. And he said that was one of the few times since he was injured that he got treated just like everybody else. Nobody cared what his limitations were. And that, when you think about how empowering that must be, because Joey would tell stories where people would try to help him get into his car, and he would say, "No, I can do this," and then they'd insist, and it would be frustrating. It's like, "No, I have my way. I have trained myself to do this. I am capable."
Yeah.
And it's this kindness that people want to show, but it's a frustration because they're not allowing you to just be you. They're making assumptions about what you need, and they're not actually asking you who you are. They're deciding who they think you are and then trying to be helpful and a good person. And there's not that they're bad people for doing so. It's just the two things become a little incongruent, you know?
Yeah.
And then for Joey, that was when he knew, like, this is a thing, because in here, I'm everybody's equal. I'm getting treated the same. I'm not special. I'm not different.
Yeah.
And what Alan and Joey figured out was they saw Joey improving and losing weight, and eventually one of his legs was longer than the other. So he went under the knife again to have them evened out so that he could be better on the mats. And these changes that Joey was experiencing, they said, what if we could get this out to other veterans? Because I think we're onto something here.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of We Defy Foundation. So what I start to put together from my own experience in jiu-jitsu and hearing these stories and listening to other veterans were 5 components that I thought I got to be able to explain this to people somehow. So I let's take 5 things. What's interesting, and I'll get into these things in a moment, but we're doing our own study right now that's been funded. It's with the University of Texas Southwestern. That's going to look at, and it's going on right now, where they're going to check into like certain scales and certain tests that are already validated, that are already used reliably by scientists and by practitioners or by therapists to evaluate patients, to see what the changes for these individuals in our program is over time. And we have other phases of things that we'd like to do in the future, depending on how this goes. Kata DeWitt, we talked about that in the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, so that she is a black belt of his. She did a study on our program too, independent of what we're doing. I want to paraphrase a little bit, but it was reduction in PTSD symptoms, resiliency, and post-traumatic growth. All 3 of those components that were measured using like industry standard or scientific standard tests showed improvements on either a moderate or major, I think that's the proper terminology, but significant improvements. Like, they were very definable. And in her study, one of the things that they saw was that it wasn't just like that, hey, PTSD got a little bit better. Like, the way that they rank this stuff, it's like that for some of these folks, it was like the PTSD symptoms were almost eliminated based on the way that they rank these scales. So all of that stuff is really cool. And then if we get down into the specifics of it, I break it down into a physiological, cognitive, structural, community, and achievement components. So it's 5. So the physiological, I mean, we all know like exercise is supposed to be good for us, and there's positive endorphins. That's physiological. Everybody knows that. I'm not going to spend time talking about that. But for people who have experienced trauma, if they have anxiety or depression, like diagnosably, or if they have PTSD and those are symptoms of their PTSD, the fight or flight system is activated a lot. They're hypervigilant. They have these things going on in their brain that are creating responses in their bodies with the fight or flight system. And that system evolved in us to help us fight the saber-toothed tiger. But in modern society, there's not one. But the physiological response is still present. And we don't have an outlet for it. Because when you're fighting a tiger or fighting an animal or fighting off another person, you're using that physiological process that's been going on in you. You're using it up. Like it helps you perform it. It's meant to help you combat something or fight something physically to survive. So that physiological component of jiu-jitsu is actually really important. Because if you're hypervigilant, you're experiencing trauma, you're always in this aroused state. When you go in the gym and you're fighting with somebody, you're grappling with somebody, you're actually using up all those hormones and endorphins in the way that the body intended them to be. So even though maybe it's not that the trigger for you wasn't the match, but the physiological results of having been triggered or dealing with the symptoms of these different diagnosable conditions, we're using it in a healthy way now. So it's not just sitting in the body like cortisol, which is like a stress hormone that just devastates the body if it's not addressed over a long period of time. So that's part of that physiological benefit. And then there's another one that when I brought this up on jiu-jitsu, I thought it was interesting because Chewy talks about this kind of stuff too, but this is one he hadn't considered. And I think it's really subtle and it's the most important one. It's human touch. Because we're built to receive touch. And, in Western society, I can't speak for other societies, but in Western society, it's not normal for us to be able to go and hug other people for long periods of time. And like maybe a quick hug, maybe a handshake. But you look at jiu-jitsu people, like when they hug, those are long hugs. You know what I mean? You're bonding to people the same way you bond with your child when maybe you touch their face with the palm of your hand. My kid's 12 and he still, I don't know, it's going to stop before too long. It's going to kill me. But he still holds my hand in public. He'll grab for my hand. And I'm trying to break the habit of grabbing for his because I want it to be up to him because I know someday he's going to decide that it's time for that to end. But he still does it. That builds a bond between he and I. And that's the same bond, that physiological process, the hormones that are released from that are being released on the mats with your training partners. So even though you're killing each other, it's safe. Like we get to tap, but we get to stop the attack, which we'll come to later. But even though we're doing something violent or potentially violent, we're also building bonds with these people. And so that's how I look at the physiological pieces of this and why it's beneficial to someone who may have experienced trauma or even just dealing with like long-term stress from leaving service, like that big life change, that really tough adjustment that creates stress.
Yeah.
This is a way to help us cope with it and deal with it.
My buddy Mitch referred to it as he's paying somebody to squeeze him.
So, yeah. Struggle, snuggle, yeah. Right? Aggressive cuddler.
Yeah.
So those are all important pieces of physically what's happening to us. There's a cognitive piece too. Have you ever heard the term neuroplasticity? This idea that the brain can relearn and can be reused and it can reignite pathways and form new pathways every time we experience something. We're sitting in a house, let's say we're not active, if we're worst case, like homebound or agoraphobic, or we have such challenge even getting out of the house. And we're not experiencing, like people talk about today, like touch the grass, right? Like be out in the sun, feel the sun. With something like jiu-jitsu, there is a very cerebral component to this sport because it is human chess. And the better you get at it, the more techniques you learn, that you understand how to defeat the other person's plan and their game plan. The neuroplasticity in the brain, like you're redeveloping stuff, you're building new neural networks and new connections. That's actually really important because as we get older, like old people, they get dementia, but studies have said, depending on what kind of activities you maintain as you get older, you have a built-in robustness against some of certain things like dementia. This is that kind of activity where there's so much going on from a thought process and a strategy process that it actually really helps you train your brain and retrain your brain to then go out and do other things. So not just jiu-jitsu, but having your brain primed and ready to learn, especially if you were in a state where that was not something you were engaging in, period. If you weren't providing stimulus to yourself. But now you are through jiu-jitsu, that opens you up to even more experiences and makes your brain ready to learn. And the other piece of this is a way to interrupt a rumination loop. Have you heard of what rumination is?
Mm-hmm. My mother's a counselor. So
okay,
yeah.
great. So this is it's a term that
but maybe not all my
people
listeners do.
know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. I mean, this is a technical term in psychology, that's used. And a rumination loop it's usually where we keep thinking about the same thing, or we'll wake up in the morning, we went to bed, first thing we think about, wake up in the morning, it's still there. So, but it's not just a thought. We really are tying it as a thought process that involves a problem that you can't solve. So you keep coming back to it, attempting to solve it in your brain repeatedly. That often causes stress and cortisol, and because we want to have a resolution, but because we don't, it causes some of those physiological things we talked about before with stress and hypervigilance. These things can all be triggered by these incessant rumination loops. But when you're in jiu-jitsu and someone's choking you, you're not thinking about the problem solving. You're not thinking about how you're going to pay your credit card bill. You're probably not thinking so much about the struggles you're having with maybe your spouse or whatever. You're not back thinking about the deployment. You're present because your body recognizes a threat. Even though it's a game, it recognizes that I have to do something right now or I will die. And by prioritizing your present moment, it breaks up that rumination loop. And you add that with all the physiological benefits that are positive and the positive endorphins, you leave, and now your headspace feels really good. And after a couple hours, you're probably going to go back to that rumination loop. That can absolutely happen. But when you put yourself in this position 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week, and you break that up and you give your brain and body breaks from these physiological and psychological things that are going on, it becomes a therapeutic process. So breaking up that loop is in and of itself, through jiu-jitsu and through the prioritization of the moment, a positive therapeutic cognitive experience. And the third piece that I think about is kind of as an obvious one to me, it's structure. Jiu-jitsu, you got a boss man in there, he's the black belt, he's in charge. There are belt ranks, so you can see people's ranks. Everybody knows where everybody falls into the room. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. The roles are usually pretty defined. And in a world where everything on the outside is a mess and you can't make sense of anything, in there's a structure and a rule set. And I have a friend who's a therapist that said, and he was actually a We Defy athlete too, so he was sponsored early on in the program when the program first came out. He said that for him and for some of the vets he's talked to, that structure that's there returns a sense of control to a veteran that is used. They see common things. There's this is the same as this was. This is similar to this was. I get this. This makes sense. And when they're in that environment, they have that sense of control that comes back, and that feels good. That's important because often when you're searching for purpose, when your peer group is no longer there, you feel like you're out of control. So that the commonalities between military structure and then we'll call it dojo life are of benefit because it gives you something to hang your hat on. It's familiar.
Yeah.
The fourth piece is community. And that's one of the most important things, because veterans so often leave military service feeling like they've lost their tribe. I think many times veterans have what I've come to call a trust deficit, where for whatever reason, you're not willing to trust civilians. You really feel like you only trust veterans, especially maybe ones that you deployed with. And that's partly because when you were over there, that experience was so impactful and so all encompassing that when you leave it, it can be really, really difficult to find a place to trust people like that again. And there was a therapist I was talking to once that talked about how when we operate in a combat environment and we're used to dealing with identifying threats, and we have the people around us to keep us safe from threats, when we come back, sometimes the lack of a threat becomes a threat. I thought was really insightful, because it speaks to the difficulty in making that adjustment from that one environment to this other environment.
I think that, I think that, the other piece of that is the people that were protecting you from the threat. They're gone.
They're gone.
And they may not even be reachable depending on, deployment cycles and things like that. You can't just always call one of your guys. From a standpoint of going to therapy, I know that the first time I went to a therapist after the Marine Corps, the VA, she was a delightful young lady, but talking to her about a combat deployment, when I'm looking at the pictures of her kids playing soccer on her desk, and I know that she's never been in the military, and those things, and also coming from a standpoint of not really understanding that a professional can still digest things that maybe they haven't experienced, but from where I was sitting at in my early 20s, this lady's not going to understand what the hell I'm talking about. And so you don't, not only do you not have a tribe, you don't trust civilians to have a clue. You just don't. Or if you do, it takes some time to, kind of, I guess maybe, I don't know, mature and learn and become educated and whatnot. Yeah.
Well, that's where I think with jiu-jitsu, the community piece really shines through, because you go to a gym where the people in the gym have all kinds of backgrounds. Most of them are civilian, but you'll have law enforcement officers in there. You'll have criminals, convicted criminals in there. You'll have high school kids. You'll have soccer moms. You have all kinds of people. And the thing that bonds us all in there is this commitment to a piece of the warrior ethos. Like, we are not playing pickleball.
No, it's hard.
It's hard. And we are learning a skill that can be used to defend ourselves and to, if needed, apply violence as necessary to protect ourselves. And we're doing it in a room with a bunch of people from a bunch of different parts of different backgrounds. And that commitment to that warrior ethos, I think it matters. I think it's something that as veterans we get, because that's what we all committed to. But now we start to meet civilians who have committed to it in another fashion, but we're doing it in this room together.
What it is we're all from all these other backgrounds. We all came from whatever background we had. We all had a why that we got onto the mats, right? And those mats, those whys are very, very wide ranging, but there's the things that you're talking about right now are generally going to be universal for everybody. That maybe they didn't have any idea what they were getting into, but they are experiencing the community and the structure and the touch, and so the why changes.
If we are an individual who is suffering from unaddressed trauma, or trauma that is still not resolved and needs to be worked on, we become very self-focused. We're focused on how we feel. We're focused on our bodies. We're focused on our challenges, our pain. When you're in an environment like this, where you've kind of already hit it on the head, you're exposed to other people who are there for a reason. And you start to recognize that everyone has a story. Everyone's dealing with something. And it may be different than combat trauma or military sexual trauma or something else that you experienced in service. But you recognize that all these other people, or many of these other people, are here because they found a way to help them cope with something in their life. And you don't have to necessarily be able to relate to what it was. It's this understanding that you're not the only one who's suffering. And now you're all suffering together because jiu-jitsu is suffering.
It is.
But you're doing it together. You're doing it in a group. And one of the things we hear from time to time is that learning to tap and trusting that when you tap, the other person is going to stop is something that helped them learn to trust again. Because in the beginning, you're terrible and you get slaughtered all the time. And you are stuck on the bottom. You're getting smashed. You cannot breathe. You are possibly panicking because early on, many of us experience that panic response when we're on the bottom. We just got to get out. We got to get out. We got to get. We cannot get out. But when we decide we've had enough, we can make it stop. Just tap. In a combat scenario, that's not the case. Combat scenario, you don't get to stop until the combat's over.
Right.
The losses and actions that have to happen for there to be an end to that can be catastrophic, and you have very little control over how some of that plays out.
Right. I usually use
But
the gorilla analogy. As far as if you're fighting a gorilla, you don't get to stop when you're tired. You stop when the gorilla's tired.
Yeah. And in jiu-jitsu, we tap. So I get to decide, and I know that you're going to honor it. And that's actually really important for healing, and that's really important for building trust. And we've had veterans who have said this was the piece, this was the thing for me that helped me connect with people, because I chose to be vulnerable. I chose to make myself vulnerable. I gave up. Like, I decided it's time. I have to stop. And they respected that. And then we hugged.
Yeah.
And then I found another partner. We did it again. So that's the community piece that we're social animals. We need to be brought in a community. We're not meant to be isolated and alone, because that's what leads to suicide. And then the last piece is achievement, where I think what we see, we haven't tested for this yet. This is more of a self-efficacy statement, which is actually, clinically speaking, really, really difficult to test for. You have to build your own test, your own scale for it. But what self-efficacy is, and it's different from self-confidence. Self-efficacy is the absolute knowledge that you can do a thing. And usually it's like, I know I can teach. I know if there's a subject that you want me to teach, I can teach it. I just have to know a little bit about it, and I can do it. Why do I know? Because I was taught by the Air Force to teach people how to not die in airplanes. I know how to teach. I teach jiu-jitsu. I know I can do that because I'm very confident, and it's not self-confidence, but I know beyond a shadow of a doubt I can teach. That's how self-efficacy works, and it's usually very specific about a specific activity. But there's this other concept called like transformational self-efficacy, where it goes from one activity to another. And it's hard to test and prove in a scientific environment. But what we think is happening is that the adversity that people experience on the mats and the ability to achieve and to rise above it with your friends, through your own knowledge, through the skills you're gaining, I think people start to say, hey, if I can do that, I can go do this other thing. If I can cope with the discomfort of being stuck under somebody like this, I can cope with my discomfort of going to the grocery store. I can go do that job interview. I can take risks. And I might lose. And that's another thing with jiu-jitsu. You lose all the time. I might lose, but I can cope with that. So that achievement component, I think, comes from repeatedly losing, repeatedly failing, and learning that if I can cope with this all over here, I can take this off the mat, outside of the gym, and do it over there. I think that's something most of us experience one way or another. Like, I have thought of this, but man, if I could do this, I could go do that.
Yeah.
So that's important. And I think what that leads to is we have this hashtag that's prove them wrong for the foundation. What that means to, I think, most of us is, you leave the military, look at Joey with the triple amputee. You're told who you're going to be, how it's going to be, what you're capable of doing, what you're not anymore. Your family's got requirements for you. Your friends think you're supposed to be a certain way. You're supposed to feel a certain way now that you're home. All these voices telling you who you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to react. And what we think jiu-jitsu does, it allows you to prove those voices wrong. And that's external. But then there's an internal component to it as well, because when those external voices go on long enough, sometimes we do internalize it. And the most powerful thing I think jiu-jitsu can do, it's not about proving other people wrong. It's about proving that little negative voice in you wrong. That's what we have to prove is wrong. And that's what I think the most powerful piece of this whole thing is.
How do you deal with or address, and usually it's lighthearted. Everybody says they suck at jiu-jitsu, right? Like there's this constant negative self-talk about, oh, I'm terrible at jiu-jitsu. I'm awful, and it's usually among friends where, you're not awful, I'm awful. But I've kind of hit a point where I want to stop being that way. I know that I have a lot to learn. I know that there's a lot of places to improve, but I'm going to stop telling myself that I suck at jiu-jitsu. Does that enter your brain as far as, we talk about neuroplasticity and creating pathways of how we think about ourselves and our ability?
I think it is kind of funny because we do say it jokingly a little bit, like objectively speaking, are you better than you were when you started? Right. We all get better and better. And there's always somebody better than you are, right?
Yeah.
And there's you can have moments against people where you're like, I'm so good at this now, and then the next round you're like, I'm still terrible.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for 10 years, and I still, there are levels, man. Some of the people who are newer black belts that we roll, we're around the same, level, and then you go with the brown belts, and you pretty do better than them, the pearl belts and blue belts and the white belts. I can tell you, as a black belt rolling with a white belt, it's still shocking to me sometimes the complete disparity, because I remember what it was like to be a blue belt rolling against a white belt and being like, I finally got a guy.
Yeah.
And now I'm a black belt and there is such a huge gap. And then I'm a black belt and there's such a huge gap between me and some of these guys who've been black belts for 6, 7, 8, 12, 10 years. So I think this thought of, boy, I suck, we're usually comparing ourselves to our most recent experience. And the whole of our experiences over time, we will grow, we will get better, and our losses will, you will have less of them. But we almost always compare ourselves to the most, if you had just a terrible day in the gym, I had a day where just everybody was walking all over me. Oh, I suck. I think that's normal. And I don't think, I am super competitive. It took me a long time to learn how to lose. That was actually one of the most important things that I learned, was that it's okay to lose. I tap more now quicker than I used to, because I've learned to stop caring about winning or losing as much. I mean, I still don't like it, but I'd much rather tap early and just say, okay, let's figure out why this happened so it doesn't happen again, and so that I don't get hurt, instead of just trying to hang on. I mean, my expectations of my roles are different now than they were before. When I was a purple belt against a newer blue belt or white belt, I expected to win. Now I don't really worry about it, because it's not that important to me after 10 years of doing it. You change.
There's been a clip rolling around this week that I've seen, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but they talk about how, maybe I can't believe I'm going to quote Ryan Gordon. People are training to be tough rather than to be good.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably what happens a lot early, but you mature.
Sure.
And you do it over time. It does become about development and improving versus just trying to be the tough guy.
Yeah.
And I think here's the other thing about like black belt too. Like I think for a long time, jiu-jitsu for me was about me. Like, how do I get better? How do I win this tournament? How do I get to be like one of the top guys in the room? Because I want that because I'm super competitive. But then when I got close to black belt, it stopped being about that. It started being about everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I get this white belt to be ready for blue belt? How do I help this person? Like, how do I take what I know and how do I help this person improve? How do we raise the level in the room for everybody, not just for me and like what I want to try to accomplish? Like, I think that's something I think many people as they go through jujitsu, they mature that way as well. Where hey, I know I'm getting better. I'm going to continue to improve. But what's really fun is when everybody's getting better.
Yeah.
When the whole room's pushing each other as a team, and you're looking out. And like you said earlier, when you're trying to help your teammates improve, you're trying to do that together. And that's a component that um, that's very much the focus in a jiu-jitsu room, I think. And that wasn't my experience in a fighter squadron, where yes, we were training, yes, we were trying to improve, but our focus was mostly, I think, very self-centered, like very much on our own improvement as a fighter pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the gym, I feel like, hey, let's make all of us better. Like your focus is less internal, and I feel like in this community, it becomes much more external and much more about the group, which is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, we're tribal. Do you get to talk to veterans as they're entering the program and maybe they haven't started yet? Like they haven't even had a class.
No, not a whole lot. We do have we have the mentors
Mm-hmm.
that are intended to be kind of peer support for people that the whole year, right? You have a mentor assigned from We Defy if you're a recipient. And the idea is so that can be a voice that can help you through some of these challenges, kind of peer support, can answer questions for you about what it's like
Yeah.
to begin. Um, but that's not actually, that's not a role I played much of because I was already the vice president, I think. Yeah, when we came up with this idea to have mentors in the first place.
Okay.
So I never actually did mentor,
Okay.
in terms of the program. Now in the gym, it's different because I do have, we do have new people that come in and sometimes they're vets, and that's true. And like, I have occasionally had someone that was struggling or trying to figure it out. And you do spend extra time with them, trying to help them understand the nature of the frustration and failure that is a day-to-day part of this sport. Because until you accept that that's part of what it's going to be, it can be painful.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a little bit upsetting, or disappointing.
I've seen a couple of people in their first jujitsu experiences become emotional, not from a standpoint of anybody was beating them up, but whatever that outlet of energy was, or whatever it triggered, or uh, when you have somebody that doesn't know what they're doing and it overwhelms them, how do you approach kind of getting them over that hump of making sure that they come for class number 2 and 3 and 4?
I think this is me. I'm naturally a very like huggy, touchy person anyway. So a lot of times I'll sit down next to him like real close and like shoulder to shoulder, leg to leg, and just talk and tell him that like how you feel right now is okay. Absolutely normal to feel frustration or whatever you're experiencing. Like to give them permission to feel what they're feeling. Like it's really important to let them know that they're not being judged for experiencing what they're experiencing. And I do when I see that, because that's something I am in tune with when people are sad or upset or disappointed. Um, I I don't try to give them advice on like, oh, don't worry about it. Um, oh, it'll get better. And maybe I say that toward like it'll get better at the end, or hey, I promise this will feel different down the road. But I think the very first part of it needs to be just allowing them the space to feel what they're feeling while acknowledging that it's valid. I think that's really important.
So you're giving them something deeper than the standard response of,
Yeah,
chin up.
typically. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I don't like. I think that's BS.
Yeah.
Like I know where it's coming from when people say that because they're trying to make you feel better. But sometimes we don't need to be made to feel better. Sometimes we just need to be allowed to feel what we're feeling and not be judged for it. So I try really hard to validate, and because I think if I can validate that this is okay, that it's also temporary, and that there are other things you're going to experience as well. They're going to be absolutely wonderful and phenomenal. You have to accept that this is part of it, and it's okay that it's part of it, and everybody here has felt it too, and it's okay. I think that's important.
Good. As far as what do you envision as far as the future for We Defy?
I think that the studies we're doing are going to give us a very powerful, legitimate voice in terms of jiu-jitsu being a spectacular tool for recovery from not just military trauma, but for a therapeutic experience. And this, We Defy is veteran focused, but human beings, like they encounter trauma. They just do. It's just part of being alive. And I love what We Defy does because we know that veterans are a particular community with a specific maybe not unique, but specific types of traumas, right? I mean, it's combat oriented often. Military sexual trauma is a piece of it too. But we know what people that, like most of us who served, know what other people that served went through. We have some experiences with it, and to be able to bring people that you understand into the fold of this is wonderful. But what I love about jiu-jitsu is that it's for human beings. It's not just for vets. And I love that you can bring people into this thing that don't know anything about the other people, and they can find that common ground together. They can find that common piece. So it becomes very much a human story. And maybe, We Defy starts out with veterans, but the idea is to pull them into the human experience that maybe they're pulling themselves out of or sheltering themselves from. And we want them, to be in the gym. We want them to be on the mat experiencing that. I think that that'll continue. I think it'll open up new fundraising doors for us too, as we're able to not just tell our story, but say, and this is how we know it works.
Yeah.
Because people who don't know about it or see what's going on and watch it, like, how is that helpful?
Sure. I mean,
but if I can show you with, statistically significant peer-reviewed studies that this is effective, that opens up funding doors.
I can tell you, I've had people that, their family that don't do jiu-jitsu don't understand, where I've described something in jiu-jitsu and their reaction is like, yeah, because that's totally normal.
Yeah, right.
But veterans don't have a corner on the market in trauma, and I think sometimes,
right.
At least among veteran communities, maybe we lose sight that civilians have trauma too.
Yeah,
and they can address it the same way we can.
Right, and I think that's important. That's how we relate to each other. It doesn't have to be the same trauma. And as I said, like when we are dealing with serious trauma, we're internally focused. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a vet to experience that. An individual who is fearful, who is hypervigilant, they are focused on their own bodies, their own sensations, their own survival. Right, getting us out of that and helping us focus on the other people in the room and realizing that our experience in this hell or with this pain is not unique. It is a very human, very common experience. We just can't see through it. We can't see past it yet.
Yeah. We keep trying to build that community, on the mats and then also with our fellow veterans. You mentioned, actually, you talked to General Farragut earlier today, and I know that tomorrow morning in our 6 or 7 a.m. class, he will bring up our buddy check because it's Friday.
Awesome.
So If you're listening, check on your friends, military or not. So what I'll say is, TJ, I appreciate you coming on, um, and carving out a part of your day and talking about We Defy. I know that I've enjoyed getting involved thus far, and I'm gonna keep being, hopefully more and more involved.
Yeah, it's been
And
awesome having you
yeah,
on the team and the role that you've been playing. And I don't know if you've talked about what you're doing, but
not really. I mean, I've talked about volunteering a little bit, kind of just in a general sense, but um, I'm enjoying I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So if I'm basically coordinating the athlete submissions weekly that they put in, and they don't always have comments. Sometimes they just put a couple of dates in, and that way we know they're attending. They're using the benefit that WeDefy is paying for. But sometimes they leave notes. Either they need help with something, they have a question about their scholarship, or they need to tell us about an injury where they may have to take time off. Or sometimes they'll share victories too. So when they get a stripe or they get promoted or a combatives thing, I get the opportunity to reach out and help them, or high five them via email. And so
yeah,
it's another way that I'm I'm getting as much out of it as what the help that I'm giving is kind of the best way to put it. And so I enjoy it, and I enjoy talking to the athletes, and you know giving that encouragement. That's again, I said at the beginning, jiu-jitsu has been something that has been transformative, and um, even though I never used the benefit of We Defy because I don't think it existed when I first started, but um, boy, I believe in what it's doing. So yeah, I'm on board.
what and what you've been doing. Like I said, I want to say thanks to you for the efforts that you put into that because you've been an awesome fit for that role. Just the way that you speak to people, for the thoughtfulness that you put into your responses. You can tell that like I can read when I read what you're writing to these individuals, like I can feel how much you care and how much you want them to feel cared for and that we want their needs met. And that is such an important thing for I think a recipient of a service like this to be able to feel. And it doesn't happen automatically. Like it takes effort from people on our team to pull that off. And I'm really excited to have you doing that and being one of the people that makes sure this thing works the way we want it to work for the
Yeah.
veterans.
Well, I think of it when I'm emailing an athlete, I don't know necessarily always how long they've been going yet, and I do know what it's like to be the new guy in the gym, and
Hmm.
maybe you are on those first couple of days, and maybe you're a spaz, and maybe you're
Yeah.
worried if if you stink, or you're worried about all these other social things that you've met the tribe, but you you don't fully know where you fit into the tribe yet because you're too new. So if I can reach out and at least let them know there are people kind of helping them form that tribe, then I think the more likely to continue. Thank you,
You're
TJ.
right. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
I appreciate the time as well. Last thing, we have an event on the USS Lexington coming up.
Hmm.
Can you give
That's right.
some details, the date, and
It's November 1st. Time wise, I'm not exactly sure what time it's happening. It's on the website. It's in our social media, and tickets will go on sale tomorrow, Friday. That will have all that information. So
okay?
it is in Corpus Christi. Uh, it's I think they go on. I shouldn't say I don't know the exact time. It's in the morning though. But look on the WeDefy social media because it's being announced there. I don't want to tell anybody the wrong thing. Actually, by the time this comes out, it'll be after that point. So,
Yeah, we'll talk
um,
about the release schedule, and I might bump you up a little bit. Um,
okay. But the event itself is going to be awesome. We have four incredible instructors that are going to be on it. That are three of whom are either Olympic or world jiu-jitsu, like world champion, world Olympic medalists. Like this is not the guy from across town teaching. This is four of incredibly talented, high profile people who have been doing the sport at the top level for a long time. and they're going to be on top of an aircraft carrier doing jiu-jitsu with 125 people that decide to go and support us with their ticket purchase.
That's
So
fantastic.
first of its kind. I don't know if anyone else is. Maybe it's, I don't know. I don't
I
think
think
it's
it
been
sounds
done
cool.
before.
I think,
Yeah.
as I think about it, I think, okay, so I'm in Central Ohio. We're going to be doing an open mat at my gym, and I'm talking to some other people in the Central Ohio area, at least, where we're going to try to, get a larger than average, open mat, for We Defy. But it got me thinking, you have the Air Force Museum, down there in Dayton.
Right.
That
Yeah. Right, Pat. Yeah.
I wonder if there would ever be a possibility of finding a way to do an open mat in, one of their ballistic missile rooms, or
Well, see, that's where with We Defy, the local ambassadors, that's where this stuff comes into play, because we don't have at the board level the ability to put our hands out into everything. We've got people like you, we've got ambassadors at the grassroots level who can call interesting places like this, to go try to put an event on. And we should mention too, this worship series kicks off. The actual date of the event is November 1st, I think, right? I think that's when it's actually being held. And it's kicking off our Veterans Day campaign. So we're asking all of our training facilities, all of our volunteers to help coordinate an open mat to raise funds for We Defy Foundation. And that becomes almost a month-long push where we want everyone who supports us to be on a mat somewhere, with their cameras, with phones, shooting Instagram videos, talking to their coaches about holding an event. Because this and Memorial Day are two big campaigns where we really ask the community to go out and support us. And this year we get to kick it off with this awesome thing on an aircraft carrier. So it's pretty amazing.
that's incredible. So if you're listening, check that out for the aircraft carrier. Now, if you're not going to fly to Corpus Christi at the beginning of November, look in your local area. Talk to your local folks at Gracie, Ohio. I know a lot of my listeners are obviously people that I know. Make sure you're at my We Defy open mat, November 14th, Gracie, Ohio. I hope to have a lot, I hope to pack the mats. So please get out there and either support by getting to an open mat, or if you just get online, look up the We Defy Foundation and, consider a donation. So,
And if you want to hold an event, all you got to do is hold an open mat. And if you want to know how to do it and do it to support us, you can message me on my Instagram with We Defy. It's Blitz at We Defy. You can just look that up and message me, and I'll put you in touch with the people who are helping coordinate all these open mats, because the bar is not very high, and it doesn't matter if you raise $20 or $3,000. Every single penny helps us to pull this off and to get more veterans on the mats. And like every single amount matters, and because it's not just the vet that we're helping, it's their family, it's their kids, it's their friends. One scholarship ends up touching 10 lives. But it doesn't happen unless we have people willing to help us on the grassroots level to pull it off.
I can also say that, when I was looking into We Defy as an organization that I was going to get interested in supporting, I did the research into the financials ahead of time to make sure that money that's going to We Defy is going to mission. And you guys are right on target where you need to be. So again, if you donate, you rest assured your money's going to go help the mission and get a veteran onto the mats. So, yeah. So TJ, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you very
rounds,
much.
happy rolling, and maybe someday we'll get you back on again.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.